SimEMR is a web platform for education in medical simulation. The power of SimEMR is that it allows students in an electronic format to document a patient's history entirely in a simulated educational perspective. The big power of doing this is it allows you to have the flexibility of creating and designing patient profiles and developing cases without having to require actual patient information that could compromise HIPAA or any of the other problems with using an actual EMR for this purpose. SimEMR was designed from the ground up to be easy to use over all levels of technical literacy. It's simple to learn. There's as much depth as you'd like to put into the simulations. The software is capable of handling that depth. The logical place for this documentation to occur is on a website so that students can access it from their phones, their tablets, their computers, and it's been designed and optimized to work on all of those platforms. Instructors can manage the simulation status for students from the web platform as well. Typically they'd do that on a desktop computer, but it will work on a phone or a tablet as well. The instructor really drives the content creation for SimEMR. The instructor creates patient profiles, which will then be used to develop unfolding cases for the students. They have organizational and assessment tools built right into SimEMR that allow them to manage their classroom status and the grading portion of the exercises. The student portion behaves as close to a real EMR as we can possibly make it. They will log into the EMR, they'll have a list of patients to care for, just like they would in a real hospital. Whenever they select those patients to care for, they have the ability to complete different forms that simulate events that have occurred to the patient. So in a real hospital, a student would administer medication and then that medication administration would be tracked in the EMR. SimEMR allows for the tracking portion in the EMR. It also integrates with our other hardware and software solutions to bring medical simulation to life. For the example of medication administration, the student would be able to go to their med dispense cart, take the medication out, and then administer it to the patient in a simulation scenario, then log into the simulated EMR and document that administration just like they would in a real hospital. In order to set this up for the student, the instructors have to do a little bit of the content creation, as I mentioned earlier. They have to manage their patient profiles. A patient profile is an unfolding case that represents everything that occurs to a patient that is medically relevant for the simulation that you're programming. So whenever you create a patient profile, that contains things like the admission of the patient with all of the demographic information that goes with it, any history, any lab orders, intake and output, the admission assessment, a head-to-toe assessment. Any of those forms can be completed for a patient, and that allows you to build up a patient case just like you'd see in a real hospital. One of the most innovative features of SimEMR is the SimTime component of a patient profile. Other EMRs, softwares in the simulation realm have a known problem with all of them. And that problem is after you create a simulation, it's kind of locked in time. And because time is very important in medicine, a matter of minutes can make a difference between life and death for a patient. So time needs to be one of the core focuses of any good simulation. And it becomes very cumbersome for instructors to manage the time piece of their simulations. So what SimTime allows an instructor to do is while they're creating a patient profile, they will define that profile with time as a focus. So whenever they create an event for a patient, let's just say a lab value returns from the labs, and the student would need to have access to that lab value. So you define the time when the simulation begins, and let's say you want those lab values to have been delivered 15 minutes before that simulation begins. You would enter the sim time for that lab value to be 15 minutes before the simulation start, and then whenever the learners get those patients, they would see that lab occurring 15 minutes before they started their simulation. And I'll come back to that with the student focus that comes later, but that's the groundwork for that. The other thing that this SimTime component lets you do is plan unfolding events in the future. So if you want a simulation to unfold over the course of an hour, a day, a year, you have the ability to do all of that in SimEMR. You can set that all up in advance, or you can do it as your students use SimEMR. You can program events to happen 15 minutes after the start of the simulation, and that information will be entered into the system at the time of the patient profile creation and will only become available to the students that set period of time after the simulation has started. So we've talked about patient profiles, we've talked about how they relate to students. The core piece of the patient profile and student relationship is actually assigning the profiles to students. We can now manage the assignment status of various patients by creating courses. Courses are analogous to the courses that you have in your actual learning institution. So you can create a course that maps directly to, Nursing 101, for example. You create all of your users will log in, they'll sign themselves up to the course, or you can sign them up to the course by managing a list. You can further break courses down into groups. So if you want to have one group work on one patient and one group work on another patient, for whatever reason, you can do that. And once you have your courses established, you can then assign patient profiles to those courses. And what that does is that allows the patient profiles to be under the care of the students in that course. You can assign them such that they have a group simulation. So you assign the patient profile and everybody cares for that one patient. So if student A administers medication to the patient, student B would see that. You can also assign them in a one-to-one relationship so that whenever you create the assignment, each student gets their own copy of the patient. And that would allow for student A to not be able to see the work student B has done, and that's more important for validation and testing purposes. In conjunction with all of the assignment and patient profile piece, you have the ability to manage the formulary of drugs available for your school. It's a robust formulary. You can reuse orders that you've created all the way down from the generic level where you can enter specific generics and then use those in other drug formulations later. And you can take that all the way up to one particular course of antibiotics you run for a specific infection. You can save that order, and then every time that specific infection comes up, your students can be trained, oh, I know with this infection, I give this antibiotic course and it's saved right in there. Those can either be hidden or visible. You have the ability to customize everything with that. You also have the ability to set up your own lab values and orders. If you have a specific, maybe a little bit more obscure subject matter you're trying to teach your students, maybe they're very advanced students, so you want to train them to look for this one specific lab value, you can add that to your lab value just for that patient. And whenever that patient's labs come back with that obscure value in an abnormal range, then your students would perform that critical thinking step and know, okay, well, this is what's going on. So coming back to the student, once you've assigned patients to a student, the students can log in and they'll view that patient profile exactly as you created it. They'll have only the events that you triggered to have happened before the start of simulation will be visible to them. And one of the most fascinating parts about SimTime is whenever a student logs in to their profile, you can have the simulation start whenever that student first logs in. So that patient exists in the system in kind of a ready state, and then whenever the student logs in, that patient becomes active, all of their history is up to date. So for something like neonatal care, where you're talking about days, hours, minutes being critical in development, and you want all of your users to be able to experience the simulation at the same way, but maybe not at the same time, this SimTime setup will allow that because each student would have their own individual start time, and the dates that show up, dates and times that show up on the forms they've completed would be relative to that simulation time that you defined earlier. Once the student is in, the simulation is running, they can complete any of the forms that the instructor can complete. Any of the events that they create will still be available. And once they have done whatever exercise you have set out for them, most commonly medication administration, providers' orders, lab values, care plans, any of the things that a student would do in a real hospital training environment, they would do here. So the student would complete all of their work, and then the instructors can view that work from the instructor portion of SimEMR You have the ability to feed back directly to your students in that view learner work portion, and you can view specific forms, you can view aggregate data, there's reporting built in, so you can get a gauge of a course on the whole, and that kind of completes that cycle from the very inception of the patient profile to the completion of the assignment. Looking to the future in terms of things that we'd like to add to SimEMR, SimEMR currently focuses best with nursing and doctoral students. We have physician-specific forms in there. We're investigating for the future having a dietetics program, a pharmacology, pharmacy program. The sky really is the limit with SimEMR, and we're going to be taking an active role in developing the future of the program. Also worthy of note, whenever SimEMR launches, we're going to have out-of-the-box functionality with the med carts that are already out there that work with the older version of SimEMR. We won't have to do any conversion for that. You'll have to download the new meds manager that works directly in conjunction with SimEMR. You can use the med carts to manage the administration routes for the various medications you may have assigned to your patient cases, and it further increases the realism of the simulation. If you're using the Fusion HD and ETC solution also offered by KBPort, SimEMR will integrate with that so that whenever you start a simulation on a mannequin, the same simulation can be started on SimEMR to further add to the utility and realism of SimEMR. In conclusion, we at KBPort really feel that SimEMR solves a lot of the problems that exist with simulated EMRs on the market. They're cumbersome, they don't look good, they aren't flexible enough, it takes too long to learn. We've really put a focus on decreasing the load on instructors specifically to set up their simulations. One of the ways that we've decreased that load is we're now including 36 patient profiles right out of the gate with SimEMR. You'll have access to all 36 of those patient profiles. There will be explanatory materials that come with those to explain this is what this patient is designed for, this is how you can replicate it, this is why these choices were made. And we're really hoping to have a sort of learn by doing type mentality with SimEMR that it seems to be lacking in the other EMRs. We're really excited about the future. Like I said, it's very expandable, and I think that SimEMR has grown from the product it originally was because of feedback from users of the original system into something that is going to work much better for everybody.